So we're going to talk about the options for renewing your EMS certification so you can renew your New Hampshire Emt-Basic license. And there's some new things that we need to have you aware of. And as you know, in the past, the way to renew in New Hampshire was to take a refresher training program, so an RTP, which was 24 hours, still is 24 hours, and then you take a 48 hours worth of other continuing education. So 48 hours of CEUs. So that totals out to 72 hours in every 2-year refresher cycle. That was one way to do it. The other way to do it was to do the exam in lieu. Exam in lieu means you go out and you take the National Registry cognitive exam for Emt-Basic, and if you successfully pass it, then you get recertification approval, and basically you spend 0 hours of continuing education. Now the third way is new in New Hampshire, but we basically say you can get it all through continuing education. We do it in this manner. There's a way for you to think about this. So there's the refresher component, which in the past I guess is the same as taking the RTP, but now rather than sitting through a formal RTP, you can get it through continuing education on your own hours, I guess. So that's the 24 hours still of refresher level component, plus the 48 hours of other continuing education. So that still equals the 72 hours. It's just a little bit different way of capturing those hours. It's kind of all your responsibility now. As opposed to sitting through the 24 hours of a refresher training program. All right. So now there's something that I want to make you aware of to make sure that you get the right content. So I'm going to just change the screen here for a second. So the National Registry breaks down the refresher hours into certain categories, and they have requirements for each of those. So when we look at preparation content, which would be anything regarding operations, we look for 1 hour worth of content. For airway management, we look for 2 hours. They're looking for 2 hours of education. For pediatric, infant, OB emergencies, they're looking for 2 hours of content related to that. Patient assessment, they're looking for 3 hours of content related to patient assessment. Medical emergencies, they're looking for 4 hours of content related to that. Same as trauma. Trauma is also 4 hours worth of content. And then you have 8 hours worth of electives. So any basically clinical component that you can put in as far as 8 hours, they accept. That totals out to the 24 hours of refresher component. Now again, remember that's 24 hours of refresher component, and then the 48 hours of other CEUs that you need to take equals the 72 hours of refresher component of refresher training to prepare to get your recertification through the National Registry. Now, this information is available on the National Registry's website, which is nremt.org, and I encourage you to go to that website and take a look on the link that says refresher information, and you can pick your brochure for the Emt-Basic level, and it'll give you all this information. So I encourage you to go to that. Now there's a couple things I want to caution you about that you need to be aware of. Let me go ahead and clear the screen, and then we can talk about that. And the first thing I want you to be aware of is the conversion from the Emt-Basic, your current Emt-Basic, to up to the new level, which is Emergency Medical Technician. So the new national standard level of EMT. Everybody's going to have to do that by either 2015 or 2016, depending on when your license is set for expiration. That has to be done. So sometime during this period, this has to be done through a formal state-approved refresher training program that has the transition materials. Now, transition materials aren't like maybe the New Hampshire Scope of Practice stuff that you've done in the past. This is transition or conversion information from the national standards to get you up to the new level. So there's state-approved courses that are at this particular level, and you will have to attend one of these during the next 2 refresher cycles to get up to this level. You cannot do this through all continuing education. Okay, so you have to go through a refresher sometime in these next two cycles. Now, the second caution is basically related to validation of the content of the refresher con eds that you're going to be taking. So validity is what we're going to be looking for. Where in the past we have had some level of control, working with the instructor coordinators to know the validity of the education was good. Now we've lost some of that control, but we're still responsible for making sure that there's good content that's out there. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it through audits. All right. So, as a provider who recertifies through the completely continuing education and not going through the refresher training, you'll be subjected to random audit. All right. Now, this isn't a punishment of any kind. This is just the way that we try to validate that the content that's out there is appropriate. How is that going to occur? Well, you may be contacted by the Bureau of lead you to validate on ahead. And we may simply be looking at a list. Send us a list of what you took, when you took it, number of hours and things along those lines. It may be that you might send us certificates. So every time you attend something, you get a paper certificate. Keep it in a record and be able to send that to us. And that may be all we require. And certainly, if we look at information or content that comes from hospitals or from conferences, EMS conferences, or state licensed EMS instructor coordinators, we're going to have a high level of assurance that content is valid and is good. Now, what we don't necessarily have is for folks that we don't know who are giving continuing education, and that may be the training officer at your EMS agency, and that's fine. We just need to know that they are putting out content that you're going to use for the refresher component. We need to make sure that they're putting out content that's valid. So we're going to be maybe asking for documentation of certain components of the 24 hours of continuing education that you do. So we're going to be looking for further documentation of that. And let me just kind of like clear the board here a second and kind of explain to you what it is that we're looking for and how you go about getting that. So we're going to be looking at a couple of things from the instructor who's going to be putting on CEUs that folks could use for a refresher. So we're going to want them to be able to come up with learning objectives, demonstrate that they did put learning objectives together for this continuing education. We want to see that they have the credentials, they have the expertise to talk about the topic that you're going to be using. We want to know where and when the training occurred, and we're going to want to see a roster who was actually at this particular education offering. So how do you get that? Well, basically, you're going to have to go back to your instructor to get this information. We're not going to expect you to keep this information, but we are going to expect instructors to keep this information, and we'll be letting them know what our expectation is. So you need to be able to, at some point, go back to your instructor and say, "Hey, look, I took this continuing education offering from you, and I've been audited by the Bureau. I need you to get me that information," and they need to be able to get that to you, whether it's by paper, electronic means, or whatever. What does this actually mean? This is something you need to think about. I call it buyer beware. You need to understand that you have the responsibility for this, and you need to make sure that the instruction that you're getting, that you're going to use for the refresher training component, that you get it from a valid source. You get it from a good instructor who can provide you with this information. If if you talk to the instructor ahead of time and say, no, I'm not going to keep that information, or you have any qualms about that, by all means go ahead and use it for the other continuing education, the other 48 hours, but it would be very risky to use this for the 24 hours of refresher component continuing education, because if we determine it's not valid, you could end up with a suspended license until we kind of resolve the issue. So please be aware of that. All right, so I guess that's it for now. I hope this was helpful to answer some of your questions on the current mechanisms to refresh your certification and your license in New Hampshire. If not, if you still have questions, I encourage you to go back and view the this presentation again. And if you still have questions, by all means, please give us a call to New Hampshire Bureau of EMS and ask to talk to an education specialist, and we'll see what we can do to help you.